Hello, welcome to a new episode of 2020. Good evening. My name is John Gergis, and I'll be your host for this evening's session. I am from the Church of St. Mary and St. Athanasius in Mississauga, Canada. I would like to introduce to you, though, an amazing group of young adults.
I'm Sylvie Fahmy, and I'm from St. George in St. Louis, North York.
I am Josh from the Church of Archangel Michael in St. Tecla and in Brampton, Ontario.
My name is Mark, and I'm also from the Church of Archangel Michael in St. Tecla, also in Brampton, Ontario, Canada.
My name is Valeria, and I am from St. Bishop Stouffville.
Very good. So welcome to this evening's session. The topic for tonight is on loneliness. And do you think loneliness is something that we should be seeking, or is it something that we should be avoiding? And that's what we want to discuss.
I think loneliness is actually a bad thing to be lonely is not a good thing. It could lead you to many sins. Like, you can be sitting by yourself. You're not going to necessarily be thinking about God or thinking about your plans for tomorrow. It could lead you to a lot of bad things. Like, I know one example is King David. When he was sitting alone, you could say he's bored, and he looked outside the window and he saw Bathsheba, and he saw her taking a shower. That's not necessarily a good thing. That's what caused him, his downfall. He's a great king, but loneliness led him to do something that's not necessarily good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's actually what I was gonna go into, was the fact that you're lonely because you physically are alone and you're isolated from everything else. Your mind is where it's most open. And so just because you're alone by yourself, your mind drifts into certain subjects that maybe you shouldn't be thinking about. For example, boredom is something that can lead into, in the example of David, like we said, something that you don't really want to be thinking about. And so that's just my 2 cents. Really.
I actually have to disagree with that, because many of the monks today, why they become monks is to leave the society, the tough society, inappropriate things, and to leave and to be lonely. But maybe when you're lonely, you're not necessarily lonely, you're with God. You're talking to God, you're with God, and you're in prayer. So you're saying that when you're lonely, you can get bored and think of inappropriate things. It can go the good way. And when you're lonely, you want to talk to God. You're alone, you're isolated from the inappropriate things, you want to talk to God.
But in my opinion, when it comes to being lonely in that aspect, think of the monks. They're so disciplined, and so much more disciplined than we are.
But they started off by being lonely.
Well, yeah, but okay.
Okay, be honest. When you're with your friends, are you gonna start praying just when you're like at school or something, and you're with your friends hanging out for lunch? Are you just gonna sit there and pray? You're not gonna pray. You're not gonna talk to God.
No, but that's where it comes in. You're not lonely. You're with a group of friends.
Exactly.
And you brought up the point about monks. Monks go into the desert having the intention that they're gonna live their life for God. But if you're just sitting lonely, you're not planning to be lonely. You're just sitting there doing nothing, have nothing to do.
I definitely agree with you in that aspect, but I also think that loneliness can actually bring you closer to God, because it sets aside all the distractions, and not just distractions from people, but distractions from things. Like let's say, for example, you're driving, you have a car, and you're driving and you have the GPS system in your car. If the person is trying to speak to you and your music is so loud, how are you gonna listen to what the GPS is saying? You're not gonna end up to be in your destination. So I also think that loneliness in many instances in the Bible has brought many certain individuals to where they had to end up being. And it gives you, when you're lonely, it gives you that kind of time to have some self-reflection, some self-examination, just to examine yourself more and be more you know what I mean?
Yeah, but
focus.
Yeah. But that could also lead to negative things. Like if you're just sitting, let's say looking at your life in general, you could just out of boredom, out of whatever it is, you could point out bad things about yourself. You can be like, oh, why am I here while my friends are there? Why do I look like this? Why do I act like this? You can end up criticizing yourself, and you can also end up criticizing other people. It doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you're terrible, but being alone causes you to think
notice
of
a lot more things,
notice a lot of things, and it's not always good, you know? Like,
Okay, so maybe it goes both ways then.
it does. That's what I'm saying. I think our points and your points, they kind of contradict each other, but it's both sides.
When you think of the word integrity, somebody defined it, integrity, by meaning you are who you are when no one is looking. It could be alone.
I think this kind of ties in with something I wanted to say earlier. I think there's a bit of a difference when you talk about being lonely and being isolated from things. I think isolation would be what sort of referring to what Josh was saying earlier, how isolating yourself from a group. And then being lonely is sort of more a mental sort of state, for lack of a better word, I guess.
I still feel like it's the same. Because you're still isolating, you're still separating yourself from other things. So no matter what, you're isolating or you're being lonely.
Yeah, I respect that.
But I feel like when you're lonely, you can actually hear God more. Like, you know, when you're still and when you're quiet, that's when God will come in. And we always like wait for God to answer us, but He's waiting for us to listen. So it's really important to just...
And so you guys are saying we listen best when we are alone.
Yeah.
And before, you guys were saying when you're alone, you think of bad stuff or something. Does that mean when you're with friends, you're going to think of good stuff? You're going to walk around praying?
No, but when you're alone, it's like the door is open wider. Like there's more room for you. Like you're not going to just sit and be like, oh, you know, my day's been going great. My life is so wonderful. You're obviously going to sit down and criticize. The reason you examine yourself is to see what you can do better. And in order for you to do better, you look at the negative things that you've been through or the bad things that happened to you, and you find a way to reflect upon that, to act upon it, and make yourself better. So you're not always looking at the good, but the good could come in, but it's mostly bad because sitting alone is trying to find yourself.
Exactly. Like,
and also when you're sitting alone, the devil like sees, like the devil's like, oh, she's alone. Now's my time to just go in and attack. And like,
because you're weak when you're yourself. Like when you're with your group of people, it's like, oh no, one of her good friends could like be like, no, talk some sense into him or her, and be like, let's go to church, pray, whatever. But when by yourself, like they say, your worst enemy is yourself. Like when you're by yourself, he's just there, like he's like, I got this, you know, like.
And that's why people commit suicide, for example, when they're alone, because they don't have anyone else around them to, you know, to be like, no, don't do it.
Yeah.
Like they just go off on their own.
Exactly.
And make these stupid decisions.
And people that think of things like that don't talk about it to other people because they want to keep it to themselves. They're by themselves.
But that's more isolation, right? Now they're isolating themselves from everybody else, right?
It could be, but what if, let's say, an instance like someone is being bullied because of a certain, I don't know, cultural aspect, feature, physical feature, anything. Yeah, faith too. Like you could be like, oh, I go to church Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
People
They'd
easily
be like,
find that wrong.
Why are you at church so much? Why are you so like? They think you're like unsocial, or why are you not with your friends? Why are you not chilling? Like stuff like that. Like doesn't necessarily mean.
When in fact, it's actually the opposite of that, because those people that say, oh, why are you always going to church? They don't realize that the church and whatnot that I go to, that gives me a stronger support system and a stronger sort of, foundation to be exact, like that I like strengthen myself with, and that I try to avoid loneliness with, and that I feel that I can overcome loneliness and all of the problems that can associate itself with loneliness. Like,
so I think like we've all like agreed that loneliness is, well, either good or bad, but how can you overcome it like in a good way? What would your opinion be?
Well, I think loneliness is loneliness without somebody asking about you. I think being alone with God is a positive thing. And that's where the difference is. So loneliness, so loneliness, can I be in church, in a large church, the congregation may be 1,000 people, Can I be alone in church with God and be amongst thousands of people? Absolutely, you can.
It's your choice in the end.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you can be alone with God no matter where you are. That's a relationship that you have with God. Loneliness is when, let's say, no one has asked about you. And you're going through a difficult time, maybe in your life. And no one cares to even pick up the phone or text you and say, hey, how are you? That's loneliness, right? So we can live in majorly dense population cities where we feel very much alone because nobody cares to ask about even your neighbor.
But I also think it's also very important to occupy yourself. Occupying yourself is huge. Like, you know, if like you're bored and like, you know, why don't you go make sandwiches and give them to the poor or something? Or why don't you like go serve or do something? Like yesterday I was
that lonely time to
Even
Exactly,
better
like I'm
yourself
done my-
and be productive.
yeah, like I'm
That's
done my
applicable thing.
exams, you know.
Right.
Now I'm lonely pretty much most of the time. I have nothing to do. Why don't I go job searching
productive
or
with it or
be,
something.
exactly be productive?
Do
like,
something
and you
positive.
you can even discover your own talents like with by being lonely. Like
Yeah.
like I made my own song yesterday, like just
Very cool.
randomly.
Yeah.
So you know, just different things like that, or you can study your Bible, or
Right.
I think
Yeah.
from what we've all said, I think it's kind of safe to establish that there are sort of two types of loneliness. One, loneliness, brought upon sort of isolation like based on yourself, and then isolation based on others. For example, others like would be something like the bullying that we were talking about,
Yeah.
whereas by yourself would be sort of something like John said, how in the church you can isolate yourself and be with like and just be alone with God.
yeah.
I think
Right.
that's-
And I think that's a good summary. Thank you for attending another session of 2020, and I hope to see you very soon. God bless.